WandaVision, 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 WandaVision. Is it just me, or has that been stuck in anybody else's head for literally the last month?
Lesmiserableone. Ding.
Hello there once again, my friends, and welcome back to the Lesmiserableone channel, a place where we make silly internet videos and things. Now, apologies for not doing a proper video reacting to episode 5. If you've seen the last video that I made, which I'll link in the iCard, I did talk a little bit about how last week was just kind of a bit rough. I was a bit ill, and then things were just not too spectacular, and I just really wasn't in the zone to be filming like a hypey video talking about exciting stuff in TV shows. However, we are back, we are better than ever, and we are going to be talking about WandaVision episode 6. So without further ado, I'm going to let you know that this video will include spoilers, and we're going to jump right in to WandaVision episode 6. Now, one of the first things that I noticed is that during the previously on WandaVision segment, they show clips of Aaron Taylor Johnson in Age of Ultron kind of bringing up the whole, yep, this is not the right Pietro, this is a new guy, he's the one from the Fox Marvel X-Men films. Why? It kind of suggests that this episode is gonna kind of address those questions, at least in part. We then go into this kind of like Malcolm in the Middle style intro, which is just very cool. There's some little details, like when Wanda closes the door, you can see the red spark of the magic, so it's very clearly like becoming more like Scarlet Witchy Wanda magic. But in particular, the lyrics to that intro sequence are actually very interesting, because it directly says things like, don't try to fight the chaos, don't question what you've done. And it almost sounds like it's like a higher force that's speaking to Wanda, and it's saying like, don't question what you've done, you know, don't try to fight the chaos, embrace the madness. And other lines such as, if it's all illusion, sit back, enjoy the show, and let's keep it going through each distorted day. Which are interesting because we're obviously talking about the fact that this is an illusion, but also you've got, you know, the distortion of the guitars, the distortion of the imagery in that Malcolm in the Middle style intro, and it just sets the tone from the beginning that everything is it's falling apart, really. This kind of perfect little idyllic little fantasy world it's distorting, it's breaking. Another interesting thing to note is that everybody else's names, like Wanda Maximoff and the twins' names, they just appear as their names. But Pietro Maximoff says as himself underneath, almost suggesting this whole like, is he who he seems to be? Is it, you know, what's going on? Like, Pietro Maximoff is playing himself. He's playing a part of the character in the TV show. We also get another line, no way of knowing who's coming to play, commenting on how in this kind of TV show bubble, we've already had the dead Vision come back, we've now got the dead Pietro come back, but also not the right one. We also, of course, had Sparky the dog in the last episode from the Visions comic series, but it could also be referring to all of the potential different cameos and things that people are theorizing on. People have already discussed there being like a massive potential cameo coming towards the end of the series, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit. So the actual episode starts with Tommy and Billy kind of narrating the episode, staring directly into the camera, again in Malcolm in the Middle-esque fashion, but just completely obliterating the fourth wall. And we get a lot of cool, interesting moments with Pietro kind of appearing as this almost comic relief type character. And it's almost like he's filling Agnes's role in this episode, because we don't see a great deal of her until towards the end. He comments on Wanda's Halloween costume, saying that it's worse than when they were kids and when their mom made them costumes, and there's this kind of weird disconnect moment where she's like, that's not how I remember things. And he says, you probably suppressed a lot of the trauma, which is probably a humorous reference to growing up in like war-torn Sokovia or whatever was going on, but also you suppressed a lot of your trauma, and that is why this whole thing is going on right now. We also get a moment where Vision comments on the fact that Wanda chose his costume, which is just kind of interesting. And then he kind of pretends that he's going to be part of the neighborhood watch still, and that he's going out on duty, which is interesting because it kind of seems like he's still playing along with this whole reality, even though we know that he's becoming self-aware. And Wanda has this little crack where she's about to say like, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And she kind of like catches herself mid-sentence and she's like, you didn't tell me you had plans. Another interesting moment is when Vision's talking about going out to be part of the neighborhood watch, and he says that they are the only thing that stands between the toilet paper and the trees, doing an interesting little symbol with his arms that may or may not represent anything, that may or may not be coming. X-Men. As Vision leaves, Pietro zooms up and does a scary face, and Wanda gets the absolute bejeebus scared out of her, presumably because she's recalling the moment where she saw her dead husband's dead face, and she's like, oh, trauma flashbacks. Honestly, Evan Peters' kind of character here, he reminds me of like Owen Wilson, like the accent and the characterization. I very much enjoy it. So then he zooms off to get him and little Tommy Quicksilver and Speed costumes to go with Billy's little Wiccan one. We then cut out to the little sword base outside of the bubble, where we're progressively starting to see more and more that Hayward's character is just, well, he's just a bit of a douche nozzle, isn't he? Obviously highlighted in episode 5 when he shows the clip of them having Vision in the workshop and he's disassembled and they're obviously experimenting on him when Wanda comes in to steal the corpse, presumably being where the whole, you know, AI and robotics and nanotech research that S.W.O.R.D. is doing is coming from, because they were experimenting and researching on Vision. No wonder Wanda would want to come and break in there and, like, have him back, thank you very much. But also, he's just generally being a big old Captain Douche. He makes a lot of sexist comments towards Monica and Darcy. He refers to the people who were blipped out of existence as you people who left, as if they had some sort of a choice to, you know, just be, like, clicked out of, like, the existence of the universe as entirely, like, what? But also it makes you question what actually happened in those 5 years. Was there anything crazy that went on during that time period? Because the way Hayward talks about it, you would think that there was. And are we going to see that in kind of future Marvel productions? So anyway, Hayward completely flips on Monica, Darcy and Jimmy and kicks them out. He's like, yo, get them out of here, away from my base, this is my base now. They then go all badass, beat up a bunch of guards and steal their uniforms and go all undercover. And Monica completely states the obvious and says, ha, he's up to something. So then we're back in Westview and suddenly there's just a whole load of new people that we've never seen before. In all of the first few sitcom episodes, there were like a couple dozen people. Like, I literally commented on that a couple videos back. But suddenly there's just all of these people everywhere. And also, there are kids, there are children everywhere. The children didn't exist, but now there are children. Tommy and Billy go to run off and do some trick-or-treating and stuff, and Pietro refers to them as demon spawn. One of those little kind of blink and you'll miss it moments, but could that be referring to them being byproducts of Mephisto? So then they're kind of alone and it's just the two of them, and Wanda's sort of testing Pietro. She's like, hey, remember when we were kids and this happened? And he's like, you're testing me. And she's like, yes, because I don't believe that you're real. She literally directly asks him why he looks different. Again, one of those meta moments where the show is literally addressing all of the questions that we have been asking, but just asking them in the show and being like, why? This does not make sense. Make it make sense, please. And so it's kind of becoming clear that even though this is obviously Wanda's doing, this kind of bubbly creation, is also simultaneously not. There's still something not quite adding up and piecing together and making sense. Pietro then makes a comment and says, if I found Shangri-La, I wouldn't want to be reminded of the past either. Shangri-La, according to Google, literally being a fictional utopia. It's interesting that Pietro's role here is that he's directly addressing the fact that, you know, this isn't real. This, like Wanda, come on. Like, we saw Agnes start to crack in episode 5 where she was like, do you want me to do it again? Do you want me to take the scene from the top? But Pietro is just straight up, no nonsense, cutting through it like, yeah, Wanda, I know this isn't real. Which also begs the question, why is he there? If he knows that it isn't real, and he knows that therefore he shouldn't be real, why, and why? There's then a little bit of like a kind of meta funny moment where Tommy says kick-ass, and then Wanda repeats it and she's like, kick-ass. Oh yes, Kick-Ass, that film that Aaron Taylor-Johnson was in, who's meant to be Pietro, but isn't. Then we get another little bit of a weird, like, Wanda's controlling everything moment where she's talking to Herb, and Herb starts kind of commenting to someone on his earpiece about things that Pietro and Billy and Tommy are doing before they've actually done it. He's like, what's this? All the candy's been stolen? And then the candy gets stolen. And then all the jack-o'-lanterns are smashed, and then they get smashed. And he's narrating the things before they actually happen. And he keeps asking Wanda, like, is everything okay? Like, do you want me to change anything? Is this all good? Is this flying by your standards, Mom? Of course he tells her that, what, Vision's not on duty doing the neighborhood watch thing? Shock. We never suspected that. And it cuts to Vision, who's kind of on his own little mission, like, what's going on here in Westfield? This is very strange. Where he happens across another kind of glitchy simulation, like Herb doing his my man moment. And there's a woman just sort of stuck, like hanging up washing, but not really hanging up the washing. And she's just stuck, and a single tear rolls down her face as she just continues to hang up the washing. This is where we're starting to see that, you know, if Wanda's controlling this entire simulation or whatever, this entire town, that obviously she's not influencing everything all the time at every moment. People are just kind of placed like props in a scene. These people are just there. There's a guy in the background just like, oh, putting down a bucket or picking it up, who knows, because he's just stuck there. We then get a really creepy kind of ad break for a product called Yo Magic. I'm personally not really sure what to make of this one. It does say that it's the snack for survivors, which could have references to either, you know, surviving the events of Endgame because Wanda's still alive, but Vision and Pietro obviously aren't. It could be referring to the people who, you know, survived and had to survive through the 5 years of the blip. It could really be anything. One thing that I did pick up on is that the yogurt was kind of strawberry flavored, which obviously is red magic, Yo Magic Red. Yeah, that, I mean, I don't really have a lot of thoughts on that one, so if anybody wants to share theirs in the comments, please do let me know. We then cut to them walking away from a cinema where they're showing The Incredibles and The Parent Trap, which of course is interesting because The Incredibles didn't come out until 2004, which means this is another sort of anomalous, anachronous bit of information that doesn't fit within the timeline. Pietro then explains why he came to town and his sort of part in everything, you know, stir up trouble with the husband, take care of the kids, etc, etc. That's what he wanted, isn't it? The way he sort of words things makes it sound like he knew that she was crying out for help, that she wanted him or she needed him to be there, and so he came, which obviously doesn't really make sense because he's dead. But she also asks him, what happened to your accent? And he replies, what happened to yours? Which of course we noticed in the last episode when Wanda steps outside of the bubble and suddenly has a Sokovian accent back. So whether it's a byproduct of being inside this sort of fictional reality world, or whether she's just sort of, you know, affecting this American accent to kind of fit in with this idealized life that she wishes that she had, I don't really know. However, then Speed suddenly gets his powers. He goes boom and starts running really fast, and of course he's a kid, so he just runs around in circles like a little madman. Wanda makes a little joke about like, hey, if you're gonna break the sound barrier, at least take your brother with you, and they're like, okay, and then they run off trick-or-treating. But remember, don't go past Ellis Avenue. What is Ellis Avenue? I guess we'll find out. Cut back to Sword, where Monica, Darcy and Jimmy are going all super duper secret spy agent and breaking in, and Darcy's like, I'm gonna hack into their systems, boop 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 boop. And they find out that Hayward has a visual inside of Westview and some sort of tracking system that of course he didn't tell them about. Sort of like when he knew for 9 days that Wanda had broken into the facility and stolen Vision's corpse, and just, you know, only conveniently told them when he deemed it appropriate because he was given permission or received authority, even though he literally is the acting director, so from whom would he need to receive the authority to share this information? He just withheld it because he's a douche nozzle. Anyway, we notice that Hayward's software is tracking a particular sort of blip within the hex, or the anomaly, which we presume immediately to be Wanda, except it isn't, because it's reading signs of decaying vibranium, which of course we instantly know is Vision. Which raises the questions, why is he tracking Vision, and also, why is he decaying? Is that the sort of natural half-life of vibranium, which is kind of how he's being detected, or is that the literal fact that he's dead, that he's a decaying corpse within this kind of simulated reality, except he's still not really alive? They then explore the rest of this little tracking system and notice that, you know, there's some dots that aren't really moving, like they're just pretty static, and these people aren't moving. What's going on there? And then it cuts back to Vision because he's moved, and it says reacquiring asset, again suggesting that to Hayward in this direction that he's taking the sword in, that, you know, Vision is an asset. It's on him that they were experimenting and deriving a lot of their new tech that they're allegedly going to use to combat threats from space, a la Secret Invasion. So then it cuts back to Vision's little dot, and he's moving into like this circle of houses with little dots that just aren't moving. Of course, we cut onto Vision, who is then arriving in this little circle with all of the dots that aren't moving, and he's like, whoa, this is weird as all heck, like everything is completely static, completely still, apart from some dogs barking in the background. It's also interesting that this is literally set during Halloween, so it kind of like mirrors and reflects how creepy the tone of this episode is. He's then like, hang on, you know, something's really like incredibly off, not right, and he flies up, you know, kind of gets rid of his Halloween costume, and he's just like, ha, I'm Vision again, and he flies up, and he looks around and kind of can't really see anything on the horizon, but then he sees like the red lights of a car. Interestingly, the colour red is what he zooms in on, when it was the colour red that kind of popped through in the black and white episodes, and also red, you know, witchy, hexy magic. So he zooms in, and the car has Agnes in it, and it appears as though she's kind of trying to leave, to get out of the border, and she's been frozen like all of the other frozen people, and perhaps that's why we haven't seen so much of her in this episode. However, there's something a little bit interesting going on here, because when Vision awakens her and she's like, whoa, what? You're an Avenger? Are you here to save us? Wait, no, you're dead. Am I dead? And there's this whole weird exchange that goes on. It's weird because in this episode, Pietro has been fulfilling the sort of role that Agnes would usually play. Plus, Agnes was featured in the opening kind of credits sequence, but she's not been featured in this episode until now, when she's allegedly trying to leave town. Is she being pushed towards the edge of town because Pietro has come to fulfill this role and therefore she isn't really needed? But then who is deciding that she isn't really needed? Is it Wanda that's deciding that, or is it the other power that's controlling things? So anyway, we kind of find out that maybe Agnes isn't involved, except maybe she still kind of is, because there were theories in episode 5 that when Norm said, you know, she's controlling everything, you have to stop her, he never specifically referenced Wanda, so maybe it could have been Agnes, except it seemingly wasn't. Doesn't mean it couldn't have been Dottie though. But anyway, there's a really interesting moment where Agnes sort of starts to break down and she starts laughing maniacally like a witch, which she is also dressed as for her Halloween costume, again implying that she would be Agatha Harkness, which we kind of assumed anyway. So anyway, Vision puts her back into the bubble and she's like, okie dokie neighbour, and drives off all happy as Larry. And Vision's like, okay, what's going on? Goes towards the edge of the border, at which point we see the Ellis Avenue sign and say, that's why the kids can't go past Ellis Avenue, because past Ellis Avenue doesn't exist. It's outside. It's the edge of the world, of the border bubble barrier reality. Cutting back to Darcy, Monica and Jimmy, Monica talks about how she's going to go meet her guy from the last episode, who's going to get her back into the hex. Her guy being the aerospace engineer, my mind immediately went Fantastic Four, but then I was also like, well, why would they do both Fantastic Four and X-Men in this at the same time? Maybe it's just sort of little snippets and seeds and preludes. But then Darcy shows the lab results that Hayward has from Monica's kind of blood works, and it shows that the energy inside of the hex is literally rewriting her cells. And of course she's been in and out, so she's had kind of two exposures to that reality filter, which would explain her results in the last episode where it's just a bright light, and also kind of, you know, preludes to her getting powers and being photon or spectrum or whatever name she goes with. Cut back into the bubble and they're at the town square that Agnes was allegedly trying to get to, and everybody's laughing and everybody's having a good time, and Wanda and Pietro sit together and he mentions that Mum and Dad would have loved it here. Which is interesting because it's like the third or fourth time that their parents and their childhood have been brought up, and it's not something that's ever usually discussed. The Sword People mention it in the last episode when they're talking about her upbringing, but it's never really a thing that Wanda talks about her childhood. And it's interesting because it seems like Pietro is trying to evoke this imagery of her childhood and of her parents specifically. Because if you remember, he said that he almost sensed that she needed him, and that's why he came. Geraldine / Monica in episode 3 brought up Pietro, which is why she started thinking about him and singing in Sokovian and crying, and suddenly, lo and behold, in episode 5, Pietro appears. He appears to be there in her perfect little bubble vision reality thing because she was made to think of him, and then suddenly, lo and behold, there he is, because it's her perfect world where everything is perfect. So now, what if you think about your parents, Wanda? What if you think about your childhood? What if you think about, I don't know, your dad, Magneto? Obviously we're kind of building to and establishing the X-Men and mutants and all of the things, and it almost seems like him trying to evoke this imagery of her parents is trying to get her to bring them into the bubble. Like it says in the opening sequence, you never know who's going to come along to play. Maybe he's going to show up, which would lend credence to all of those theories surrounding the final cameo. Both Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen have said in interviews that it's going to be big. Paul Bettany particularly said that it's someone that he really has always wanted to work with, a big actor. It's going to be a big cameo, something big and important in the context of Marvel that's going to change the way that people look at the MCU forever. And so a couple of the most logical answers were either Patrick Stewart as Professor X or Ian McKellen as Magneto. So if ever there was a time to bring him in as Magneto, it would make sense, particularly with how much her and Pietro are discussing in this episode her childhood and her parents. I don't know, I think that could be a thing. That could be where this is leading to, particularly with the events that unfold towards the end of the episode. So again, Pietro makes another little, comment that just scythes right through everything, and he's like, so where were you hiding all these kids until now? Because they've, never appeared in any of the sitcom episodes until now. It makes sense, really. Protect them from all the trauma by keeping them out of harm's way and only bring them up for the occasional holiday special. But this is also interesting, because Pietro only just appeared. How would he have knowledge of everything that had been going on in the bubble and, before he got there? And it definitely reinforces this idea that he was sort of planted there by whatever higher power or whatever is controlling things behind the scenes. Because he's like, come on, I'm not your husband, I'm not your neighbour, I'm not whoever, you can talk to me, you can tell me things, you can confess to all of this stuff. And she starts talking about how she felt emptiness and she felt alone, and she still doesn't recall how she did it, how she made this bubble, how everything came to be. And then she turns back and he's dead, and it's, the same thing as the Vision trauma flashback, oh god, that's my dead brother, mint. Anyway, things are starting to build up, they're getting all hectic. Vision's trying to get out of the bubble, sort of ha ha ha, hello. Darcy Lewis is like, whoa, what's going on? That's mad, there's something weird going on here. Then suddenly Billy gets his Wiccan powers and he's like, whoa, I can hear the soldiers outside of the bubble even though I've never been outside the bubble in my life and have no kind of concept that there's anything outside of this world that I live in. But also I can hear my dad and he's in trouble. Whoa, ma'am, help. And Pietro's like, it's not like your dead husband can die twice. And Wanda's like, pew! Go away, you're weird and not right here. Zaps him out of the way. Wiccan's like, meow, trying to detect where he is, and Wanda's like, oh god, no, he's dying, he's in trouble. And suddenly, expands the entire bubble. She's just like, you know what, if Vision's gone a little bit out of it, I can just make it bigger, and so that it covers him. Which is where things get even more mental and haywire, because the bubble just keeps going. It doesn't go like that little bit of distance just to get to Vision. No, it just keeps going. Darcy Lewis is chained to the front of a truck because Hayward's an evil douche nozzle and she gets swept up. And an interesting thing here is that we see what happens to a lot of the sword soldiers that get taken into the bubble. They turn into like clowns and things like that. And a lot of the sword tech and vehicles turns into other stuff, like ice cream trucks and hot air balloons and various things. But we don't see what happens to Darcy. Everything else passes through the reality filter and gets turned into something comical that fits with the Halloween festival theme, but we don't see what happens to Darcy. But also, if the energy of the Hex is what's kind of rewriting Monica's cells and presumably resulting in the kind of appearance of her powers within the MCU, could it also be rewriting the cells of and having an effect of everybody that's already inside it, and or at least the people that have kind of been exposed because of this expansion of the bubble? Could this be the MCU logic and justification for mutants, for how they kind of get brought in and how things start to appear and unravel? I don't know, but either way I'm excited as ever to find out and to continue watching and following along and theorizing and thinking, and I'm having a whale of a time. And I hope you are too, so let me know your thoughts in comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like rating and subscribing. Of course, let me know if you want to see any other sort of content or what you'd like to see on the channel in comments. As always, I hope you're having a really good day. I will see you really soon.